Jefferson called the unalienable rights to life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. It was dedicated strongly to Republican principles, which emphasized that people are sovereign, not hereditary kings, demanded civic duty, feared corruption, and rejected any aristocracy. Early years of the Republican Federation and Constitution. In the 1780s, the national government was able to settle the issue of the western regions of the young United States, which were ceded by the states to Congress and became territories. With the migration of settlers to the Northwest, soon they became states. Nationalists worried that the new nation was too fragile to withstand an international war, or even internal revolts such as the Shays' Rebellion of 1786 in Massachusetts. Nationalists, most of them war veterans, organized in every state and convinced Congress to call the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. The delegates from every state wrote new constitution that created much more powerful and efficient central government, one with strong president, and powers of taxation. The new government reflected the prevailing Republican ideals of guarantees of individual liberty and of constraining the power of government through system of separation of powers. The Congress was given authority to ban the international slave trade after 20 years, which it did in 1807. Compromise gave the South congressional apportionment out of proportion to its free population by allowing it to include 3/5 of the number of slaves in each state's total population. This provision increased the political power of Southern representatives in Congress, especially as slavery was extended into the Deep South through removal of Native Americans and transportation of slaves by an extensive domestic trade. To assuage the anti-Federalists who feared too powerful national government, the nation adopted the United States Bill of Rights in 1791. Comprising the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, it guaranteed individual liberties such as freedom of speech and religious practice, jury trials, and stated that citizens and states had preserved rights, which were not specified. President George Washington, renowned hero of the American Revolutionary War, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, and President of the Constitutional Convention, became the first President of the United States under the new Constitution in 1789. The national capital moved from New York to Philadelphia in 1790 and finally settled in Washington, D.C. in 1800. The major accomplishments of the Washington administration were creating a strong national government that was recognized without question by all Americans. His government, following the vigorous leadership of Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, assumed the debts of the states. The debt holders received federal bonds, created the Bank of the United States to stabilize the financial system, and set up uniform system of tariffs, taxes on imports, and other taxes to pay off the debt and provide financial infrastructure. To support his programs, Hamilton created new political party, the first in the world based on voters, the Federalist Party. Two-party system. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison formed an opposition Republican Party, usually called the Democratic Republican Party by political scientists. Hamilton and Washington presented the country in 1794 with the Jay Treaty that re-established good relations with Britain. The Jeffersonians vehemently protested, and the voters aligned behind one party or the other, thus setting up the first party system. Federalists promoted business, financial and commercial interests and wanted more trade with Britain. Republicans accused the Federalists of plans to establish monarchy, turn the rich into ruling class, and making the United States pawn of the British. The treaty passed, but politics became intensely heated. Challenges to the federal government. Serious challenges to the new federal government included the Northwest Indian War, the ongoing Cherokee-American Wars, and the 1794 Whiskey Rebellion, in which Western settlers protested against federal tax on liquor. Washington called out the state militia and personally led an army against the settlers, as the insurgents melted away and the power of the national government was firmly established. Washington refused to serve more than 2 terms, setting precedent, and in his famous farewell address, he extolled the benefits of federal government and importance of ethics and morality while warning against foreign alliances and the formation of political parties. John Adams, Federalist, defeated Jefferson in the 1796 election. War loomed with France, and the Federalists used the opportunity to try to silence the Republicans with the Alien and Sedition Acts, build up large army with Hamilton at the head, and prepare for French invasion. However, The Federalists became divided after Adams sent successful peace mission to France that ended the quasi-war of 1798. Increasing demand for slave labor during the first 2 decades after the Revolutionary War, there were dramatic changes in the status of slavery among the states and an increase in the number of freed blacks. Inspired by revolutionary ideals of the equality of men and influenced by their lesser economic reliance on slavery, northern states abolished slavery. States of the Upper South made manumission easier, resulting in an increase in the proportion of free blacks in the Upper South, as percentage of the total non-white population, from less than 1% in 1792 to more than 10% by 1810. By that date, total of 13.5% of all blacks in the United States were free. After that date, with the demand for slaves on the rise because of the Deep South's expanding cotton cultivation, the number of manumissions declined sharply, and an internal U.S. slave trade became an important source of wealth for many planters and traders. In 1809, President James Madison severed the U.S.'s involvement with the Atlantic slave trade. Louisiana and Republicanism under Jefferson. Jefferson's major achievement as president was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which provided U.S. settlers with vast potential for expansion west of the Mississippi River. Jefferson, scientist himself, supported expeditions to explore and map the new domain, most notably the Lewis and Clark expedition. Jefferson believed deeply in republicanism and argued it should be based on the independent yeoman farmer and planter. He distrusted cities, factories and banks. He also distrusted the federal government and judges, and tried to weaken the judiciary. However, he met his match in John Marshall, Federalist from Virginia. Although the Constitution specified Supreme Court, its functions were vague until Marshall, the Chief Justice, 1801-35, defined them, especially the power to overturn acts of Congress or states that violated the Constitution, first enunciated in 1803 in Marbury v. Madison. War of 1812. Thomas Jefferson defeated Adams for the presidency in the 1800 election. Americans were increasingly angry at the British violation of American ships' neutral rights in order to hurt France, the impressment, seizure, of 10,000 American sailors needed by the Royal Navy to fight Napoleon, and British support for hostile Indians attacking American settlers in the Midwest. They may also have desired to annex all or part of British North America. Despite strong opposition from the Northeast, especially from Federalists who did not want to disrupt trade with Britain, Congress declared war on June 18, 1812. The war was frustrating for both sides. Both sides tried to invade the other and were repulsed. The American High Command remained incompetent until the last year. The American militia proved ineffective because the soldiers were reluctant to leave home and efforts to invade Canada repeatedly failed. The British blockade ruined American commerce, bankrupted the Treasury, and further angered New Englanders, who smuggled supplies to Britain. The Americans under General William Henry Harrison finally gained naval control of Lake Erie and defeated the Indians under Tecumseh in Canada, while Andrew Jackson ended the Indian threat in the southeast. The Indian threat to expansion into the Midwest was permanently ended. The British invaded and occupied much of Maine. The British raided and burned Washington, but were repelled at Baltimore in 1814, where the Star-Spangled Banner was written to celebrate the American success. In upstate New York, major British invasion of New York State was turned back. Finally, in early 1815, Andrew Jackson decisively defeated major British invasion at the Battle of New Orleans, making him the most famous war hero. With Napoleon apparently gone, the causes of the war had evaporated and both sides agreed to peace that left the pre-war boundaries intact. Americans claimed victory on February 18, 1815, as news came almost simultaneously of Jackson's victory of New Orleans and the peace treaty that left the pre-war boundaries in place. Americans swelled with pride at success in the Second War of Independence. The naysayers of the anti-war Federalist Party were put to shame and the party never recovered. The Indians were the big losers. They never gained the independent nationhood Britain had promised and no longer posed a serious threat as settlers poured into the Midwest. Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was a Protestant revival movement that affected the entire nation during the early 19th century and led to rapid church growth. The movement began around 1790, gained momentum by 1800, and, after 1820 membership rose rapidly among Baptist and Methodist congregations, whose preachers led the movement. It was past its peak by the 1840s. It enrolled millions of new members in existing evangelical denominations and led to the formation of new denominations. Many converts believed that the awakening heralded new millennial age. The Second Great Awakening stimulated the establishment of many reform movements including abolitionism and temperance designed to remove the evils of society before the anticipated second coming of Jesus Christ. Era of good feelings. As strong opponents of the war, the Federalists held the Hartford Convention in 1814 that hinted at disunion. National euphoria after the victory at New Orleans ruined the prestige of the Federalists and they no longer played significant role as political party. President Madison and most Republicans realized they were foolish to let the Bank of the United States close down, for its absence greatly hindered the financing of the war. So, with the assistance of foreign bankers, they chartered the Second Bank of the United States in 1816. The Republicans also imposed tariffs designed to protect the infant industries that had been created when Britain was blockading the U.S. With the collapse of the Federalists as party, the adoption of many Federalist principles by the Republicans, and the systematic policy of President James Monroe in his two terms, 1817-25, to downplay partisanship, the nation entered an era of good feelings, with far less partisanship than before, or after, and closed out the first-party system. The Monroe Doctrine, expressed in 1823, proclaimed the United States' opinion that European powers should no longer colonize or interfere in the Americas. This was a defining moment in the foreign policy of the United States. The Monroe Doctrine was adopted in response to American and British fears over Russian and French expansion into the Western Hemisphere in 1832. President Andrew Jackson, 7th President of the United States, ran for second term under the slogan "Jackson and no bank" and did not renew the charter.